Meanwhile, 6 months previously, there had been the birth of a miracle child. In the hill country around Jerusalem, where Zachariah and Elizabeth lived, there had been a lot of talk and wondering what the birth in their old age of their child could mean. Was God at move again in the land? Aha, I hear you say, how does a poor donkey from Nazareth know of the goings-on in and around Jerusalem? Well, we listen to the news exchanges of our owners, and there is a lot of coming and going down to Jerusalem and back. So you get to hear things whilst munching hay in a stable in Nazareth. Not that our owners did much hay munching. They just leant on stable doors and said things like, "Did you hear about that old priest who got struck dumb in the temple? Quite a miracle, they say, because before that you could hardly stop him talking. Zachariah the talkative, they used to call him. But then, for 9 months, absolutely silent, not a word out of him. And that's not all. His wife, just as old as him, barren for donkey's years." I bridled at that. Us donkeys are proud of our years, and come to think of it, our ears also. But I digress. More on donkey ears at another time. Then they used to say that if he could stop talking long enough, then perhaps she would be able to conceive. And blow me, he did, and she did. And then guess what? When the baby was being circumcised and named 8 days after his birth, there was this almighty row amongst all the relatives as to what to call the child. I giggled to myself. Well, they aren't going to call it a donkey, are they? Anyway, silliness aside, they continued. The old lady was trying to tell people that the child should be called John, but the relatives were not having it, because by custom he should be named after his father or grandfather. She was just about to burst into tears when her old man wrote loudly on the slate that he had been using to communicate with. In fact, it was more of a shout than a write. He wrote, "His name is John." And if that wasn't enough, he actually started to speak again and praise God and prophesy that this little baby was going to prepare the way for the Messiah. Well, I don't know. Not a prophecy or word from God since Joel 400 years ago, and then suddenly God speaks through a wrinkled old minor priest living in an unknown village outside Jerusalem, whose barren wife has just had a baby. You'd have thought that any new prophecy would come from the high priest or someone important. I wonder what God's up to. So, anyway, after 4 long days travelling, we were going as fast as we carefully could, with Mary travelling mostly on my back. We came at last to Bethlehem. And where to stay? Here the palaver began. Joseph had been right. His relatives did not give him a kind reception. Indeed, they slammed the door in his face, which startled me. And when I get startled, I leave a little something on the road behind me, which happened to be right outside their front door. I was not embarrassed. Mary had not noticed, and Joseph pretended not to notice. But I noticed that he did grin and pat my neck. However, this solved no problems, so we set out to search for somewhere to stay in a small town already packed with people, not only those coming to register in the census, but all the census admin staff and the merchants trying to make the most of the increase in the population. Finally, we found a place in a stable, attached to an old inn on the outskirts of Bethlehem. It's not unusual for travellers to sleep with animals in a barn or stable. Indeed, we had slept in a barn one night on our way to Bethlehem. This one had been cleaned out thoroughly that morning, and had fresh straw on the floor, and hay in the manger, which I might add was delicious. For this, we had Isaac to thank. He was the stable boy. He looked and sounded a little strange to me, but for all of that he gave us a most friendly welcome. He said to us, in his strange voice, that an angel had come to him and told him that he was going to have special visitors to stay in his stable. He was to make sure it was especially clean and fresh. He said that he had explained to the angel that he always kept his stable clean and fresh, at which the angel had smiled approvingly, if a little taken aback at being spoken to with such assurance. I think he was used to having to say, "Fear not." But Isaac was not frightened of him. Isaac went on to say to the angel that he would make a special effort, seeing as it was an angel that was asking him. Isaac chatted away to us as he settled us in, removing a fresh chicken egg from the manger that had been laid by Julia, one of his chickens, and pushing Abel, the goat, out of the way, which he explained was called Abel because he was able and willing to eat anything, and he was not called willing because he was not usually willing to do what he was asked. He added that Anna, his cow, he had kept outside the stable, as she was more difficult to clean up after than the other animals, being that she was so much bigger and that her droppings were so much more fluid. He pointed to one corner of the stable where there was a small raised platform with a mat stuffed with fresh hay on it. "This is where I sleep," he explained, "but tonight it's yours." Obviously, he was talking to Mary and Joseph at this point, as, although I would have enjoyed the mat and the hay, I don't think he was intending them to be eaten. "I've slept out here for as long as I can remember," he went on to say, "because of my condition. People say I sound funny and look funny, and they often laugh at me, but not in a funny sort of way. My dad doesn't like me around the inn, but my mum makes sure I'm okay, and the animals here are my friends, and I look after them well." I later discovered that he had what you would call nowadays Down syndrome. He was one of the kindest and sweetest young men I have ever met. Mary gave a little whimper, and Isaac seemed to notice her condition for the first time. "Are you fat, or are you going to have a baby?" he asked. "A baby," said Mary simply. I think I need to lie down." "I will go and see if I can find someone to help," said Isaac, as he ushered Mary to his small sleeping area, and then he went out into the evening dusk. Now, as a donkey, I am used to sharing my sleeping quarters with the occasional traveller, but not usually a heavily pregnant woman. Heavily pregnant sheep, goats, or horses, or even the occasional camel, but never before a human. And all of us have managed to give birth with the minimal of fuss. It seems it is not so easy for humans. Mary had been clutching her stomach on and off all day, and now she began to whimper and even give little cries of pain. Joseph began to get very agitated. Jewish men are not at all familiar with the human birth business. Maybe a sheep or a goat, but Joseph was a carpenter, so he had little experience even with sheep or goats. "I'm going to find someone," he said, torn between wanting to stay with Mary and hold her hand, which would have been no help at all, and leaving her to get help, which may well have been helpful. Just as he walked out of the stable, I heard a honeyed voice say, "Hello, darling. You're looking worried. Can I give you a good time to take your mind off things?" There was a brief choking sound from Joseph as he tried to work out what was happening, and then a little moan of pain from Mary. Joseph managed to croak out, "Wife, baby, now, help!" And a woman peered into the stable. At first glance, she was beautiful. Hair, rings and perfume, and a deep red dress. No man would only look once at her, and a second glance would not be enough either. She saw Mary lying on Isaac's little platform. It was obvious what was happening. "Oh, darling," she said once again, and this time the honey in her voice was brimming over with concern and love for a fellow creature in the pain of childbirth. She turned to Isaac, who had closely followed her into the stable. "You said that I had some business here, but this isn't quite what I thought you meant, Isaac. Now take this young man to my house and tell my daughter what is happening, and do what she says. I will look after this young lady here. Go, shoo!" And Joseph and Isaac shooed. Somehow, when this lady said shoo, you shooed, and no messing. She came and knelt beside Mary, and I shall spare you the details, but certainly a human birth seems much more troublesome than a donkey's. This lady, who said her name was Adina, it turns out, from what I picked up from the bits of conversation during and after the birth, she was a professional lady of the night. She was making the most of the busy time in Bethlehem, and she was a favourite of the local inns, as she was discreet and good at her job. She also, fortunately for us, had considerable experience with childbirth and other ladies' problems, something she felt came with her job. Her parents had been killed by the Romans. She had been raped, and she found herself alone, orphaned, on the streets and pregnant. She used her looks and kindly ways to make a living for herself, and found friends and help from others who plied the same trade. By the time Joseph and Isaac returned a couple of hours later, Mary had the baby in her arms, and Adina had ruined her lovely red dress. But otherwise things had been tidied up. Joseph stopped being beside himself with anxiety and settled down to be beside Mary with the baby. He looked over to Adina and her ruined dress. Thank you so much. I'm sorry. I would have been back here sooner, but your daughter kept feeding me cakes and fruit and insisting I drink what she offered. She would not let me get away." A younger version of Adina had followed Joseph into the stable. Adina winked at her and smiled. "Ah, my daughter. She is a good girl, is she not? And she knows how to help a father who is having his first child. This is not the first time she has helped me in this way. She knows that a new father needs to keep his strength up to help his new family after the birth. A man is not very useful during the birth itself. Now, Joseph, here, hold your new baby boy. Do you have a name for him?" Mary and Joseph both said quietly together, "Jesus. He is to be called Jesus." And so it was, and he was wrapped tightly in cloths to help keep his limbs straight, and laid in one of the mangers in the stable, which Isaac had filled with fresh hay. Which is when the shepherds turned up. There were some embarrassed greetings between Adina and several of the shepherds, but mostly they were all talking at once about angels and angelic choirs. It seemed that an angel had appeared to them and told them the Messiah had been born, and then there had been angelic choirs singing of God's glory and favour to all men and even to shepherds. One of the angels had apparently told them where to come, so here they were, and it was all just as the angel had said. Mary and Joseph seemed rather startled, and Jesus, although he was newborn, gurgled quietly and seemed to be enjoying himself. The shepherds crowded around the manger and gazed in wonder at Jesus, who waved happily at them in the way newborns do. Each of them offered him a grubby finger to grasp, which he dutifully did, and all went well until Jesus grasped firmly onto one old shepherd's longly grown beard, and he refused to let go. This provoked hilarity amongst his companions, especially as it seemed the old man was inordinately proud of his long beard. "Ha! This Messiah's never going to let you go of you, Caleb," his friends joked. But Caleb smiled back and said, "If he is the Messiah, may he never let me go." Eventually, Mary rescued him by substituting her own finger for his beard, which was just as well as Jesus tugging on his beard was making his eyes water. After a while, the shepherds went off into the streets, Caleb rubbing his beard. They made quite a rowdy crowd, shouting at everybody they met about angelic choirs and messiahs in mangers. I expect a lot of people thought they were drunk, but they weren't. As they left, I heard one of them speaking to the innkeeper. "Hey, Jake, wake up! Do you realise who's just been born in your stables tonight?" What do you mean, born in my stables?" "The Messiah, our Saviour, born just now, in your stables." Don't be daft. You shepherds like your jokes. I know you get bored in the middle of the night, but honestly, you're going a bit too far tonight. All we have down there are some slaves, a few servants, and a rather grumpy carpenter from Nazareth with his fat wife. We all know that nothing good comes out of Nazareth." "Well, she's not fat. She had a baby tonight." "Well, that's as may be. But I can tell you for sure that no one born to a grumpy carpenter in a stable in the middle of the night is going to make Messiah. Have you lot been smoking them mushrooms again? You know they give you funny ideas. Go away. I'm going back to bed." A little later, Adina returned with her daughter to check how things were with the new mother and child. They had heard what the shepherds had been saying. "Is it true?" they asked. And Mary told about the angel who had visited her and about barren Elizabeth's child in her old age. And Joseph told about the angel who had visited him in a dream and how they came to be in Bethlehem and how thankful they were that they had had her to help them when they so needed help. "If it's true," Adina said, "then why should it be me who God chose to help the Messiah into the world?" "That's what I said about being his mother," replied Mary. "He does seem to choose the most unlikely people." "And just think," Isaac added, "he was even born in my bed, though I think I will have to change my mat and hay now," which he promptly set about doing. The next day, with Adina's help, we found somewhere a little more suitable to stay. She seemed to know many people in Bethlehem. And Joseph was reluctant to return to Nazareth with a bastard child, preferring to stay in Bethlehem where he and his little family were relatively unknown. So on the 8th day after his birth, Mary and Joseph took Jesus to a rabbi in Bethlehem to be circumcised, and after 40 days we took him to be dedicated in the temple. Joseph and Mary were good Jews and delighted to fulfill the law whenever they could. They were also poor Jews and could only afford 2 doves as a purification sacrifice for Mary after her giving birth. And as they could not afford the 5 shekels needed to buy back the firstborn, Jesus was to be dedicated to the Lord with the understanding that he would belong to God when he was 12. They were just entering the temple, which is how I could see what was happening, as donkeys are not usually allowed into the temple courts. I noticed an elderly gentleman with a longly grown beard. I think Jesus must attract them. He was looking around, obviously searching for somebody, but he didn't seem to know who he was looking for. His gaze passed over Mary and Joseph several times as they prepared themselves and Jesus to go into the temple. If it had just been Mary and Joseph, they would have gone straight in, but everything takes twice as long when you have a newborn to consider. Suddenly this old guy stood stock still, staring at Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus as if he had suddenly realised something, and a look of wonderment and amusement flooded his face. Then he laughed aloud as he came across to them. "I am Simeon," he said, looking as if he was going to explode with excitement. "I have been waiting for this day all my life. God has promised me that I should not die until I have seen the Lord's Messiah. God told me he would be here today in the temple. So I came expecting to see a mighty warrior on a fearsome steed, or some wondrous lord in all his glory coming to deliver his people. But instead, he shows me this little baby. And I laugh at the wisdom of God, and suddenly I understand so much more. He asked to take the baby Jesus into his arms, and I could see Mary thinking that if Simeon had wanted a fearful experience, then he should meet Gabriel. But she didn't say it because she could see Jesus reaching out for Simeon's beard. She said, as she managed to deflect Jesus' hand from grabbing it. Simeon went on to speak about a Saviour, and light and glory, much to the amazement of Mary and Joseph. Then he suddenly went very serious and said that some would reject him, and some would rejoice over him, and that he would reveal what was in people's hearts. Simeon then looked intently at Mary and told her there would come a time when she would feel as if a great sword has pierced her through her heart. That distracted Mary from her battle with Jesus and Simeon's beard, and I was unsure if the tears that he was crying were for Mary or because Jesus had a tight grip on his beard. It was then that a very old lady, as thin as a stick, who had been hovering in the background and listening, suddenly burst into loud praise. At first I thought she was praising God that somebody was pulling on Simeon's beard, because that was something she'd always wanted to do. It was a very nice beard. But then I heard her thanking God for a king to come and deliver Jerusalem, and I knew she was talking of Jesus, who fortunately had been so distracted by her outburst of praise that he had let go of Simeon's beard and was clapping his hands together in delight. I could see Mary storing these things away in her heart as she and Joseph made their way further into the temple to dedicate Jesus to God. Joseph had decided to stay in Bethlehem for a while, so we found somewhere to stay more permanently, and Joseph had begun to get some carpentry work. For some reason, Joseph found that in Bethlehem he was able to mend more than he broke when he was at work. Mary thought it was because he was now a father. Joseph still had his remarkable ability to listen and mend people. Indeed, when Adina asked him to go and mend her bed, he listened to her tell him about the horrors of her parents' death and her rape and the terrible struggles that followed, and she ended up with not just a mended bed, but a mended heart and life. A local physician, who had been widowed a number of years, for whom Joseph mended some drawers in an ancient cabinet, talked with Joseph about his intense dislike of ladies' problems. So Joseph spoke of his experience of Adina's evident skills in that area, and soon after it was decided that Adina would cover this side of his practice, so that she no longer needed her night job on the streets. A few months later there was another palaver. We were having our evening meal. It was a lovely warm spring evening. I was just by the side door munching hay, and Mary and Joseph were sitting around the kitchen table with Mary feeding Jesus. The sky seemed unusually bright that evening, and I thought I could hear a caravan of traders approaching. I could hear camels and horses and donkeys, each with their own particular tread, slowly drawing closer. The house we were staying in was on the main road through Bethlehem, though on the outskirts of town. There would often be caravans passing by, and we would watch with interest the different characters and cultures as they moved along, and sometimes Joseph would pick up a bit of passing trade, mending part of a saddlebag and perhaps a broken heart. This evening's caravan was unusual, inasmuch as most caravans are settled in for the night by now, and as they drew closer we could see that this caravan included some very important people, who didn't seem to know that they should be settled in somewhere for the night by now. The horses and camels were magnificent specimens, and even the pack of donkeys looked pretty fit. Everything looked expensive and well maintained, and I remember thinking that there would be no trade from this caravan. However, as they drew closer, the guys in the lead seemed a bit lost. How you can get lost on one road through Bethlehem, I don't know. It's just in one side and out the other side. Anyway, they kept looking up into the sky and pointing and conferring with each other. Finally, 4 of the most important guys dismounted and came across to our front door. One was a white man, another had skin as dark as coal, a third had brown skin, and the last a yellowy skin and eyes not unlike those of Isaac, our friend from the stable. They all looked very grand and somewhat out of place in our neighbourhood, and especially outside our front door, which Joseph had tried to mend but still looked broken and made very rude noises when it was opened. The guy with the yellowy skin and funny eyes, who seemed somehow to be the spokesperson and yet the servant, stepped up to the front door and knocked. The door burped quietly at the assault, and I heard Joseph get up and come to the door, which he opened with a gentle groan and a croak. The yellow guy asked politely, with a very strange accent, "We are looking for the king." Joseph's mouth opened with a gentle groan and a croak, somewhat similar to the noises the door had just made. "King? Here?" Joseph managed to croak out, and I wasn't sure if it was him or the door that was answering. "Yes, it is written in the stars that there will be born a king to be king of all kings, and we have followed their directions for 2 years, and here we are." He pointed vaguely up at the sky, and we all looked, and he was right. It was a wonderfully clear night, and the sky was full of stars, but I couldn't see any pointing to us. "We have checked and studied the stars all of our lives, and the signs need interpreting. We have checked with King Herod in Jerusalem, and his learned men said we should come to Bethlehem. As a child of prophecy, the Messiah was to be born here. Earlier today we were watering our camels, and these crazy shepherds were watering their sheep, and they kept talking about angelic choirs and baby kings in mangers. We asked where this had taken place, and they told us of the inn and the stable. There we found Isaac, who has eyes like mine, but who is probably a much kinder person than I, and he told us that you had moved here. So here we are, to see the king. And Isaac said we should bring this for your donkey." As he said this, he held out a large, fresh carrot, which Joseph accepted. I could see him thinking, these guys have travelled for 2 years following the stars, just to bring a carrot to a donkey from a local stable boy. Either they're crazy or I'm missing something here. He leant over and held out the carrot to me on his open palm, and I graciously accepted it. It was a good carrot, worth the effort in my mind. However, then the white man stepped forward and said, "We also bring gifts for the king." As he spoke, Mary, carrying Jesus in her arms, came to the door. The black and brown man also stepped forward. Each of the men carried small but exquisitely made caskets. I was astonished as each of these fine regal men, in all their fine regal clothes, knelt on their fine regal knees in the anything but fine regal dirt outside Joseph's rude door. One by one they opened the caskets. They chanted together, "Gold for a king, and the starlight glistened off the golden coins. Frankincense for a god, and the air was filled with the scent of sweet woody pine trees and lemons. Myrrh for a death, and a shiver went down of each of our spines. They laid their gifts in the dust before the feet of Joseph and Mary, and then they bowed their heads to the ground. I began to feel uncomfortable that I had already eaten my gift. It seemed like a long time before they each stood again, gazing at baby Jesus, and I could see that each had been weeping. One by one they came forward to Jesus and kissed him on the forehead. The white guy had a short trimmed beard, very smart and tidy. The black guy was clean shaven. He must have had a very skilled barber. But the brown guy had a grand bushy beard. The white guy kissed Jesus and withdrew, very dignified, and the black guy likewise, with a smile of joy. But the brown guy got stuck. As he leant forward to kiss Jesus, his little hands buried themselves in the delightful beard presented to him. There was a little cry of happy delight and a gurgle from Jesus, and a muffled from the beard. There followed a bit of a wrestling match as Joseph tried to help liberate the beard, Mary's arms being full of Jesus. The black guy began to laugh at his friend's predicament, and the white guy, although trying to maintain the solemnity of the situation, soon also began to laugh. Suddenly everyone was laughing, and laughing until tears were running down people's cheeks and sides were beginning to hurt. "We came to worship," one of them said. "This new King of Kings demands strange worship." And they all started laughing all over again. "I think this new king will bring the greatest joy to many, but I fear he will also be the undoing of many," said the other. "Oh, my side, I feel undone," replied the third, causing another outburst of laughter. Eventually they managed to return to their caravan, hiccuping and giggling. The man with the yellow skin and the Isaacian eyes returned to us with a donkey. "I think you may have a long journey ahead of you very soon, so please also receive this female donkey as a gift and partner for your own fine donkey here. Actually, I am really rather a scraggy donkey, but I am strong and I no longer limp. However, she was a really fit young donkey, and if we have a long way to go, then help is always welcome." So the stories are always of 3 gifts and 3 wise men. But actually there were 4 wise men. One who brought gold, one who brought frankincense, one who brought myrrh, and one who was their servant, but wiser than most, who brought a carrot. He also gave us a donkey to help with a long journey yet to be taken, but which was necessitated by their visit, as King Herod also searched for this new king, to bring him, as a gift, the edge of a sword. That same night an angel came to Joseph in a dream and told him to take us all to Egypt. So he woke us all up, packed everything we could carry on 2 donkeys, and left for Egypt, catching Isaac in his stable on the way to say goodbye, which was worth it as he gave us half a sack of carrots to take with us. He was such a generous boy, that one. We would miss him. And Adina and her daughter, they'd all become our friends and new family. It was a long journey. We had become refugees, and without Sarah, who was our fit new donkey, it would have been much harder. If you want to know what happened to those 3 gifts, then you should read the story by Jane T Clement called The 3 Gifts, because she tells it far better than I ever could. So we went to Egypt, and Our time there is a story all in itself. How God looked after us, and new friends that were made, and fun that was had. And when Herod died, an angel came again to Joseph in a dream and said we could go home, and finally directed us back to Nazareth, where it was safe and out of the way of people who may remember newborn kings and wish to make offerings to him of sword edges. So we returned to Nazareth, me and Sarah, Mary, Joseph and Jesus, who now had a younger brother, and Mary was obviously pregnant with her third child. Somehow it seemed we were better accepted now we were in a larger family, and Jesus' illegitimate beginnings seemed less of an issue. Joseph picked up his carpentry work again, and although we were poor, we were comfortable enough, and Sarah also had a foal, which we were both very proud of.